guys, what's going on? And welcome back to another video on Conqueror's Blade. So, we are in the PTR, we are testing out Season 11, and I kind of wanted to dive into testing some of the new units. Specifically, in this video we're going to be having a look at the Alchemists, and we're going to be having a look at the Banner Knights. The Chevaliers, the Tier 5 Cavalry, we haven't yet got access to. They think they might be able to get them to us a couple of days before the season comes out though, so if we do get them, I'll be jumping back on with King Alpha and we'll be testing them and we'll do a separate video on them. But for now, Alchemists and Banner Knights. So I guess we should kick things off with the Alchemists. Now if you're anything like me, when you first saw them, you thought, oh, you know, a support unit, a healing unit, yeah, kind of cool, probably won't play them very much. I thought the same, but actually there's a little bit more to them than I initially thought, and actually they've got some kind of interesting features. So let's just quickly hop over to their veterancy line. They've got a couple of options really, but really before you can explain this, you need to know their abilities. Now they obviously have two core abilities. One is a heal. Basically it sets up a designated spot and then it puts like a 20-meter AoE circle. Any injured allied units or heroes that enter that circle then get a bit of healing, which works well. They actually heal quite effectively, quite good for healing you as a hero. Heals about 1,000 per tick, which is quite nice to heal you really rather rapidly, get you back up to health. Looks like they're going to be healing units individually, but going to be quite an effective way of maintaining units sort of health back up. I think they may struggle a little bit more in the fight. It's not like you're just applying an AoE buff on an area. The units actually have to run over and do the healing. So it's not going to be sort of keeping your Iron Reapers on the front line up in combat. They're going to have to pull back a little bit to get healed first. But then probably the most interesting part of them, the blinding smoke. So they basically have this ability to throw these smoke grenades, which temporarily slows down affected enemy units. And as you'll see now on the screen, they slow down a lot. Plus it stacks, so caltrops and smoke stack together, so then the slowdown becomes utterly ridiculous. So if you're a musket user, this could be quite a fun one to try and combine. But more interestingly, it reduces the accuracy of enemy firearm units. So me and King, when we were testing this, thought, oh, okay, muskets. And it does indeed significantly affect the accuracy of musket units. It means their musket balls just go all over the place. Really, really extremely inaccurate. Even like Senjis, which are quite an accurate unit, can't hit a thing. Then we thought, I wonder if it affects flamethrowers. And yes, it does. The flames go all over the place. Then we went on to test the ball boys, these Arcanian militia. Yep, they can't throw in any sort of sensible direction either. It affects javelins. It even affects axe raiders. And that's why this is really quite an interesting ability. I think that's going to make this bottom line kind of interesting, because this is what the smoke buff is. Reduces the cooldown. It also makes snow effect, increased throwing range, stuff like that. I think there's an AoE one around. Oh yeah, an area of effect is increased by 20%. Really quite interesting, the smoke. The duration isn't that long, maybe sort of 5-6 seconds, but actually if you can get one of these in and amongst a group of range, it basically means that the range units can't hit anything in that period of time and stops them from working. Elsewise, in the veterancy line, there's basically a melee line up here, which I just don't really see the benefit of. You get Oathbreaker, which increased damage dealt by 50%, but their melee is just so poor that it's really not worth having. When you only have 5,000 hit points, 6 models, and a slashing and piercing damage of 800, it's just not really worth having. If you get them into melee, then it's already game over, so there's really no point to it. The middle line has a few interesting things down it, including adding two more models to the unit, and the ability to use healing hands, reduced cooldown and increased maximum health for the duration. But realistically, the cooldown's not that long on it, and it actually stays up for quite a long period of time, so I just don't feel like it's really worth it, and smoking everyone out kind of seems like the better option. So that's the Alchemists. A lot more of a fun unit than I actually expected them to be. So yeah, so far, really quite impressed with them. Next up, we have the Banner Knights. Now these were the units that I'm probably most excited for in the season. And first things first, I want to say I absolutely love the look of them. Particularly, they almost actually look better when they're deployed as a unit because some of them have axes. They've all got these shields, look like proper medieval knights. Absolutely love it. My favourite looking unit we've had introduced to the game for quite a long time. And they do come with quite a few interesting mechanics, although they're not the most powerful unit, at least from what I've sort of seen of them so far. So let's try and break down some of their mechanics first, because it's going to get pretty complicated pretty quickly. Right, you can ignore the last one. That's an Ironsides doctrine, not relevant for this purpose of testing. But the unit basically works around a flag. And this flag can be planted in the ground. If you plant the flag in the ground, then basically the entire unit and any nearby allies will get an extra 200 points of defense buff. This is very much like the Guardian ability of the Shield Maidens. There we go, got there, remembered the name of the unit in the end. The Shield Maidens get a 250 point defense buff to nearby allies when they go into Guardian mode, and this plant the flag is basically the same thing. The only thing you've got to be careful of is it does have quite a long animation. So you can then, as a hero, pick up this flag. Now only you can pick up your own flag, allies can't pick up your flag for you, only you can pick it up. And when you pick it up, you get an own special set of abilities. One of which is a charge ability, which basically means you charge as a hero with the flag at the enemy or in any direction you want to, and your unit will charge with you. Now your unit will only charge in a straight line, they won't follow you if you zigzag, so it's whichever direction you point and charge, your unit will also charge in that direction. But you also get a unit charge, so you can actually plant the flag, charge the unit, pick up the flag, and then charge the unit again with the flag, because you will charge and your unit will auto charge with you. Then you will find there is an ability there to basically refresh the cooldown of charges. So you can then charge again with the normal charge, because this ability, with the flag, when you press the E ability, it resets charges, gives increased charge damage. Basically means you can charge again, so you can get 3 charges out of the unit. However, it gets even more complicated. The refresh cooldown ability on the flag when you as a hero have got it picked up also affects nearby allied units. So, for example, you could charge a unit of Keshigs, get, a million kills like Keshigs seem to do, bring them back, and then they would normally be on a really long charge cooldown. But of course, if you've got the flag, you can press charge refresh, and the Keshigs instantly get their charge back, and you can charge again. So you can double charge Keshigs in like 5 seconds. Now that starts to make them a little bit interesting as a support unit alone. So that's kind of the flag. Then we move on to Indomitable. It's basically just a flat buff, and the buff you get depends on which formation you're in. So if they're in the dispersed formation, their defense and damage goes getting increased by 100 points for 10 seconds. If it's in guards, you get increased defenses, and if you're in column, you get increased damage. For me, I think the 500 points of damage is by and far probably the most useful one you're going to get. The unit seems to kind of lack damage a fair bit. They have some defensive stats, but they're not that high. They do get an element of active block, but all in all, their abilities really, for me, seem to revolve around the flag and what you can do with the flag. I think when you start to use them just as a melee unit, then that's when they struggle. Against most other units that we tested them against, they didn't seem to perform very well as a combat unit. It's only for their sort of utility support did they seem to perform decently. So yeah, one-on-one, I don't think they seem like a very good unit, but when you start to mix in the flag and some of their other abilities and buffs that they can do, then I think they start to become a little bit more interesting. So just before we completely round out the video on the Banner Knights, just wanted to show a few of the clips we had testing them against other units. Now, Palace Guards, obviously a very meta unit at the moment, but they just absolutely, annihilate these Banner Knights, really. They don't really put up much of a fight, and I think that's kind of the story of the Banner Knights against most other units. Against Claymores, I was actually really surprised how brutal the Claymores were. Wait for the ability, and the Banner Knights are gone. And it's even the same against Impike. King Alpha here used the CC immunity to get the unit in, which worked quite well because the unit was largely CC immune to the walk. But the actual just damage output of the Imperial Pike Guards was enough to overwhelm the Banner Knights. And the Imperial Pike Guard pretty crap. So it kind of sums up how poorly these Banner Knights perform in most melee combat situations. And that kind of sums up the unit really. A very large amount of utility and options available to them. It's going to be great as a sort of a support unit. Not going to be performing really all that well in those one-to-one situations. It's going to really be there as a support melee more than anything else. But anyway, that's the Banner Knights. And finally, even though we can't actually play with the Chevaliers, we can see a little bit about their stats, their abilities, and their veterancy lines. Obviously, this is a sort of de facto level 1 unit, so the hit points is obviously going to be significantly higher than this, well over 10,000 we know that it will be. We get their base movement speed, which is quite slow for a cavalry unit, and we see some of their base stats. Defensively, they're obviously going to be very high, particularly once you get one of their doctrines, which is plus 100 to all armor values. They're going to be behaving a lot like monastic knights in terms of their defensive attributes. We see their initial damage with their good piercing, but actually relatively low piercing damage, which I suspect is going to be reflected in some of their charge damage. And we know that they're going to make use of 2 abilities. Assault, which is essentially a charge. Any target that is hit by the charge will take greatly increased amounts of damage. It looks like this is also going to give a buff to the retinue unit and get the retinue to charge with them as well. Because we can see that they have the retinue company unit trait, and it says if the Chevaliers use their assault order, melee cavalry and infantry will charge along with them, and ranged infantry will move up and fire at the enemy. They're also going to have a lance thrust. This unit makes use of their lances in close combat, sending enemies flying. Sounds like that's obviously got an element of knockback, so it's like an extra ability on top of the monastics. And it is worth pointing out that this is not a promoted unit. The Chevaliers are their own unit. It's not a replacement for the monastics, although in many of their sort of attributes and playstyle it may end up making them a better version of the monastics. In terms of veterancy lines, there's broadly 2 options. The top line is basically all about increased damage. We get things like the cooldown of the lance thrust, which is quite nice, a bit of an extra slow effect, damage dealt to cavalry, which make them quite a nice anti-Kesha unit. Reduced time between attacks, so that's basically an attack speed interval, which is really quite nice. And they have an attack's chance to ignore the target's defensive values. So i.e. you could hit an Iron Reaper and hit for really quite a good amount of value, completely ignoring its armor. And then along the bottom line, we have basically a defense line, reduced damage taken, basically increased base defensive stats, some more cooldowns, retinue damage dealt, stuff like that, increased hit points, movement speed, and adding more soldiers to the unit. Given they're already relatively high base units that we see in the attributes, it could be kind of interesting to go down the bottom line, just making them a really heavily tanky unit, but we'll kind of have to see. We also get to see that they have knightly arrogance, which is basically that the worse the retinue unit that you bring with you in battle, then the more damage the Chevaliers themselves will actually deal. I think the retinues are going to be relatively useless. I mean, is a unit of Courtiers really that helpful? So I think bringing a lower tier unit to basically buff the Chevaliers is probably going to be the way to go. We also see that they have these heavy horses, so they get increased damage while charging. So charging the front of archers could be kind of interesting, which we saw a little bit actually in one of the video clips. But anyway, that's all we've got time for. Hopefully you've enjoyed this little overview of the units that we've got coming in Season 11. If we do get our hands on these Chevaliers, I'll certainly be giving them some testing out, so keep an eye out for that. But thank you for watching, guys, and I shall see you all on the next one.